We will continue this morning in the Gospel of Mark. I hope it's been good for you to consider that again. It's an amazing book in the way that it's written and the way that it draws you right into. Mark's very good at drawing you right into the situation as if you're there in first person. We'll get into Mark chapter 8 today, but let's for a moment just consider where we've been recently. Mark chapter 5 are the many reasons to believe that Jesus is truly the Son of God. Mark chapter 6 and 7 are stories about the opposition. Those who are steadfastly, some of them steadfastly set against ever believing in Jesus. In Mark chapter 7, verse 24 and following, then, there's a series of 3 miracles in succession. And what would be the purpose of those? Again, it's the purpose of the rest of them, to establish the fact and cause his disciples to truly be convinced that he not only is the Son of God, but to understand his purpose in coming. They see and hear all that's going on, and they know the facts as he teaches them. They don't know the application yet, do they? They don't understand the purpose. And so, let's just pick up at the end of chapter 7 there. That's following 2 miracles. Jesus has, beginning in verse 14, healed the Syrophoenician's daughter who was possessed of a demon. This woman, be the worst of the worst of the worst kind of outcast, had no reason to have any hope that anyone would care for her, but she has faith in Jesus. She comes and she bows before him. He heals her daughter, cast out the demon. The daughter's not even there, but because of the woman's faith and her giving herself, bowing down to Jesus, pleading her case, knowing what he will do, he heals the daughter. And then the second miracle there, the man in verse 21 and following, the man who is deaf and mute, Jesus takes him aside in a rather unusual manner, spits on his fingers and sticks them in his ears and spits on his fingers and touches the man's tongue. Strange stuff, isn't it? All of it is for causing the disciples to understand. In response to those first 2 scenes there in verse 31, what's the people's response? What do they say about Jesus? He does all things well. Chapter 37, The crowd is utterly astonished, saying, he has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. I mentioned this Wednesday night. As we would say it today, just to say somebody did things well almost sounds underwhelming in a sense. What does it really mean he did all things well?
Complete.
Yes. Excellently. It also means that in Jesus there will be found no cause for blame. What's already been proven? Shortly when he will go to the cross and one by one he appears before different authorities. And what's the conclusion that all those authorities make? There is no offense in this man. There's no cause to make a charge against this man. It's already being proven right here. Who is declaring that in verse 37? Gentiles. Not Jews. Not even Jesus' own disciples are saying that. These are Gentiles. And as it is recorded, Jesus is seeing faith in Gentiles that he doesn't see in his own people. Such a faith that his own disciples don't yet understand just what is happening. I mentioned that word well, meaning no cause for blame, because of that song we like to sing. It is well with my soul. What's that tell us we must do? Live in such a way, trusting Christ's sacrifice of blood, and by our faith, that blood covering us, so that when God looks at us, He sees Christ, and we can know there'll be no cause for blame. Makes me love that hymn all the more, doesn't it? It is well. Well, let's get into Mark chapter 8 then today. It's the third of these miracles, all done among the Gentiles, and done largely for the instruction of Jesus' own disciples. In between these miracles, between several of them, you see it. There's a miracle. Did the disciples learn anything or not? Not sure they did. So often they're rebuked. You do not yet understand. Another miracle. It says, well, you still didn't learn anything in essence. So here's this miracle. First, let's talk about the previous two and what they are revealing. This woman who has the discussion with Jesus, starting in verse 24, has this discussion with Jesus about the Gentiles just feeding from the crumbs that are under the table. From that account, what is being foretold is a time when all the Gentiles will not be feeding on the crumbs under the table, will be seated at the feast with all of God's people. And then this man who Jesus touches with spit in his ear and on his tongue, what's happening there? When that man is able to hear and given to speak, he's a Gentile. It foretells the time when all the Gentiles, the message will be the gospel will be given to their hearing, and they will in turn confess Christ. Marvelous pictures. Well, this third one. Again, this is a picture of foreigners, Gentiles, feasting on God's supply. Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. In those days, when there was again a large crowd and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people. Why? Because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. They cannot endure the trip without him providing for their need. And they have come from such a great way, and they've been with him 3 days. There's a lot of information in that, and a lot we should gather from that. Again, the primary reason for this and the events to follow is for the development and the growth of the disciples' faith. Again, the problem is they see and they hear, but they don't understand. They don't know the purpose of these things. And you can be sure they're still wondering, why would the Gentiles ever be offered any more than just mere crumbs? Why would God ever invite them to be seated at his table to feast from his blessings? Well, all of these things must be proven. That in the feeding of 5,000 again, as it said in chapter 7, Jesus is doing all things well. You know, Jews particularly they would find fault with Jesus inviting Gentiles to the table. But there's that testimony. He is doing all things well, which means according to God's plan and purpose. There's no fault in what Jesus is doing. You know, men from every side of Jesus, his own people in Nazareth, from the Jews in Jerusalem, and it seems like the only people that are ready to receive Jesus are the Gentiles. And we see why in this passage. You see, in those 3 days, what's happening among the Gentiles? You see, whenever there's news that Jesus is coming, they drop everything. They leave everything. They didn't pack any food. Jesus is going such and such a place. We're going to meet him there. They drop everything. And so here they have come. This anticipation, the expectation, this heart given to worship Jesus before they've ever come into his presence. Again, it's faith not evident even among the Jews. And Jesus is calling his disciples to see the plight of this great multitude. And so, as much as feeding them, the purpose is to teach the Gentiles. Yes, Joe?
Well, I think it's also a good example that he fed them, all of them. He didn't just feed the ones that believed.
No, he fed them all.
Fed them all. And so a lot of times people think before you can help somebody or whatever, unless they're this, or this, you can't help them. He set an example that we should follow that will help whoever.
This is part and parcel of that prophecy from Isaiah I talked about 2 weeks ago, where God is coming, he's calling all people, all the nations to his mountain, and they're anticipating going to the mountain. This is the part of bringing them there. First, causing them to trust that God is going to provide all things for them, for all the peoples, it says, for all who will seek him. And so, yes, he's going to feed them all. It's interesting. What's the first thing Jesus says? He feels compassion. He's not feeling sorry for them. He feels compassion. There's a world of difference in that. That you just don't look on these people like, well, tough, they didn't bring anything with them. No, he feels compassion. They've been with Jesus 3 days. What's different between this and the feeding of the 5,000? How long had the Jews on that day been without food? Remember? Just since morning. 1 day. From sunup to sundown, they had been without food. Here's Gentiles who have been without food for 3 days. There's something important in this. He's going to feed Gentiles. The Jews have always had a covenant relationship with God. They have always had reason, whether they trusted it or not, they always had reason to trust God's provision for his people. But here are the Gentiles who have never been invited into a covenant with God. They have throughout all the ages, the patriarchal age, the Mosaic age, the time after the restoration of Israel, they've never been invited to a relationship with God. These people are hungry. He's talking about more than feeding their belly. They're hungering to know God. And it makes all the difference. They trust what he will supply, what they've never known before. Now, Jill, I put you off for a minute. What'd you have? You still remember?
I got one. Well, he talks about...
I was talking about compassion.
I got to thinking, we don't know, he may have been using the bread as like we would term a visual. That he talks, I am the bread of life. He might have, when you think about his teachings, I had this visual myself of him talking as they're passing the bread out, that, like you're saying, this is the bread that's for your physical, but I am the bread of life.
And this is building that case. This one, the emphasis is all about bread. Oh, by the way, there's some little fingerling-sized fish that somebody comes up with, but this is all about bread. The Gentiles have never heard a message of such that it would be, as to them, bread to life. Meaning there's some hope in it. That's the word of bread of life. There's hope in it. They've never been invited. So yes, they are really hungry. Really hungry. Oh, the Jews are complaining because they hadn't eaten since breakfast. These people have never known what it is to have a relationship with God. So after having traveled so far, Jesus is their priority, obviously. And he felt compassion. So long, they have gone without God's provision, without a covenant. They don't begin to understand what all that involves, but they desire it in a way that God's own people don't desire it. What's Israel made of God's covenant throughout the ages? You know, we live by it if it suits us, pretty much. And if we don't get what we want when we think we need it, we complain against God, you know, that kind of thing. But these people are hungry. They're hungry for a Messiah. And so again, hearing of Jesus is going to be in a particular place, they're going to meet him there. Drop everything as quickly as possible. You know, think about it. They left their homes, they left their work, they left their flocks. What's most important? Coming to Jesus. Again, it's a lesson to the disciples. So what is Jesus teaching that his disciples must do? What must they soon do? They're going to have to get past just the facts. Oh, we know what Jesus teaches, something about repentance, and we know that, but we got to get down this purpose of all this. To offer salvation and life, yes, to the Jews first, but also to the Greeks. You see, they've got to understand that all of this is working precisely according to God's eternal plan, isn't it? Interesting, though, ironically, that the Gentiles, in their ignorance of Judaism, better understand the purposes of Jesus' coming. They don't have all that man-made tradition that he's just been teaching again. They don't have all of that to overcome. They are, in a sense, just raw, needy, blank, open baskets. And so, what's being presented here? And what Jesus is doing and what the disciples must understand. He comes and he sees man's need. He feels compassion and provides God's provision. See the need, feel compassion, and give life. Now, verses 4 through 7, the disciples' memory is pretty short. They see the facts but not the application. The disciples answered him, "Where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people?" You think they would at least default to the previous circumstance, wouldn't they? They didn't learn anything from that. And he was asking them, "How many loaves do you have?" They said 7. Are we talking about Granny Sycamore-sized loaves here? What size are these?
Muffin size.
Good-sized biscuit. You know, kind of a hard little cake. I mean, you're not going to live long on this. No, anyway. But 7. That's it. Just bread. Again, the emphasis here is on bread. Just bread. Verses 8 through 10. From these few small, hard biscuits, what's the result? The Gentiles ate, they were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. They started with 7 small cakes and filled 7 large baskets. Now, how does that work? I mean, what they started with wouldn't fill 1 large basket, but they wound up with 7. And what's the result? About 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. And immediately he entered the boat with the disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha. Yeah, they had those 7 small loaves, and they picked up 7 large baskets, and they served all the people. And little fish too. Still, the disciples don't have any insight as to why this is happening. That Jesus would even be concerned about these people. Remember before, the lesson is that Jesus completely fills the needs of all the people, of all who seek him. 5,000 Jews were satisfied with much despair. 4,000 Gentiles are satisfied with much despair. Who will yet be fed by what is all collected in those 7 large baskets? Everyone else who will believe from that day forward, including us. With much despair. All believers in the generations to come. Reminds me of an old hymn. It's called, I am satisfied with Jesus. He has done so much for me. I am satisfied with Jesus. But the question comes to me when I think of Calvary, is my master satisfied with me? It's a great song if you consider it all. Is he satisfied with me? At this point, Jesus isn't too satisfied with his disciples, is he? Because they do not yet see. And by their lack of understanding, even in these 3 rapid-fire miracles, he's going to follow this up with these 3 events that demonstrate degrees of blindness. Yes, Jill?
Couldn't this also be a lesson for us in the fact that how many times has God delivered us or has helped us or has through our own lives situations?
Mm-hmm.
And we forget, we have a tendency to say, I'm going through this, I'm going through this again, or am I having to deal with this again, or am I having to...
It is a lesson for us, isn't it? Be reminded every week of his provision.
And I'm thinking, because here he will say, oh, thank you, Lord, for, answering my prayer, and then when our circumstance comes, a different circumstance, or maybe a similar circumstance that we thought was behind us comes up, we'll have a tendency to do like the disciples are saying,
And why they didn't take something with them from the previous experience. Solomon talks about this in the Proverbs. You come, you seek for knowledge. Pictured figuratively there in a woman who teaches on every street corner. Knowledge is available. You come to that knowledge, and what do you do with that? Then you come to understanding. You're taking that knowledge, bringing it forward with you so it applies from day to day. And finally, the 3rd step in the Proverbs is you have wisdom. You see how this applies to every situation of life. You see how to help others apply it to their lives. That's what's lacking in the disciples. Oh, they've got knowledge by this time. Just no understanding. That they can't. Yes, it does speak to us, Jill. It does speak. That we sometimes will face one challenge, come through one battle, and by the time we get to the next one, it's like God's having to start all over with us again. No, it ought not to be. Yes, Tom.
Well, you know, when I went down to Boise, I just wasn't around us, our family, and Christians. I was like, it wasn't good. I mean, being with the kids and everything was wonderful and all the grandkids, but I felt myself falling away from God to a certain degree because I didn't have anything to keep me going, you know. I couldn't read, I mean, I read the Bible and stuff, but it just wasn't the same thing as what it is here, you know. And
You were
how
just
fast we
lacking
get
the
pulled
daily
away.
encouragement of family then.
Yeah, and you just get pulled away so fast. I mean, I didn't even realize how fast I was getting pulled away until I came back to church actually yesterday, when I was just around everybody again.
So what follows these three miracles are three rather quick lessons about three types of blindness. What's the old song say? There are none so blind as what? Is he who will not see. That's the first kind of blindness, chapter 8, verses 11 through 13. The Pharisee kind of blindness. The Pharisees came out and began to argue with him. That's all you really need to read, in a sense, isn't it? The Gentiles come, they want to know Jesus. What's the Pharisees' motivation? They're going to fight. Let's just argue with him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And leaving them, he embarked and went away to the other side. There's some lessons in that, folks. How many opportunities will we be given to see? How long will God call? How long did he send prophets to his people again and again, warning them, and they wouldn't see it? And they had only so many opportunities. And after having, I'm talking about the ancient captivity, after having so long denied God, what could he do for them but to send them into captivity? There's only so many opportunities. Jesus is going to shortly depart there. Why? Because he's going to a place where he's seeking people who are seeking for him. These people are not. They're seeking to argue. There is none so blind as that. Oh, they ask for a sign from heaven. Why does it say that? What's the Pharisees saying about Jesus? That whatever power he demonstrates is not from God the Father, but from his father Satan in hell. And that's why they specify this sign. We want to see a sign from heaven so we can turn around and declare it's not. Isn't that what they do every time they've seen something? A sign demonstrating the power of God working through Jesus? They say it's not, it's the devil. So why show them a sign? There's no reason to show them a sign. All they're going to use it is for another supposed excuse to find fault with Jesus. And so he's departing that place. Verse 14. And they had gotten in the boat, or they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. I think that's interesting. They just gathered 7 large baskets of bread, and it didn't cross anybody's mind out of those disciples to maybe take some of that with them. I mean, there's some really human pictures here of people who should be prepared in these situations. They didn't take any. And he was giving orders to them, saying, "Watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." They began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. What do you think, Gary? That's like trying to train a new welder who's only thinking about lunch, isn't it? Wait. You know, he's teaching them, training them, equipping them, and they're going, "When's lunch?" Having eyes to see, you do not see. Having ears, you do not hear. and you do not remember. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, for many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up. How many? They said 12. When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? They said 7. Do you not yet understand? It's just what you were asking about, Jill. You know, why is it that we can come through one situation where we are aware of our need and God provides for that need, and we come to the next place and we don't trust Him?
Fear.
So when are they going to finally trust Him? When are we going to finally trust Him? I think it's interesting. They're largely blind in this sense because they're still thinking physically. I want to buy the bread. How can you ever? It just simply tells you they don't have the mindset of Jesus yet. That's what's got to change. Jeff and then Jill.
You know, when you look at these simple things here and we think, why couldn't they get that? And yet they spent 3 years with Him, and in the end they still left Him.
Yeah, they
They
did.
left Him in the end. I mean, they've seen all of these things.
When He was buried, they headed for the hills.
That was it. They said, it's over. It's done. He's gone. And until He came again and showed Himself to them, that's when it hit home. That's when every one of them said, okay, now we understand.
Now put yourself in the Gentiles' place. They've never known a relationship with God. They hear about His coming. They're going to be there. They're already ready. They're so hungry for a Messiah, they're ready to bow down before they ever get there. What'd you have, Jim?
Well, I think pride has something to do with it.
Sure it does. Sure it does. It has a huge thing to do with it.
Yeah, because I'm just like, well, God gave me a mind to think. I agree, but still, that's, you know, I have to once again go back to Jeannie. She had to completely depend on the Lord for her care. He used me and other people as an instrument for that. But she totally did trust that she was going to be taken care of. But she didn't worry. And she was so effective in her teaching because of that very reason. But I think
There's many ways that she was more relatable to people than the disciples are here.
yes, and I'm thinking that I can do this. He talked about emptying ourselves. Because didn't He say in the desert, I want you to depend on me so that you don't say I did this. I provided the time in the desert. I did this by my own strength. Isn't that what He's trying? He's trying to teach to them.
From the very first time He spoke about repentance, if they're ever going to change their mind about Him, they've got to learn to trust Him. Just flat out trust Him. And this is all part of that process that those who will hear, those who will see, they'll get there. He's going to continue to work. There's no more signs for the Pharisees, but there's continuing. He's going to work and show these things to the disciples. What's the difference between the Pharisees and the disciples? The Pharisees just refused to see. But anybody who is willing and open to see, He'll continue to teach. He'll continue to show these things. But if you've just said, ain't no way, no how, Jesus is heading to the other side of the sea. Remember, the Gentiles have already declared, Jesus does all things well. The Pharisees refuse to agree with that. The disciples don't yet understand enough to agree with that. And so there's this third kind of blindness. The disciples, You know, it's one of the difference between the disciples and the Pharisees. The disciples are at least willing to learn. They may be slow, but they're willing. It makes me consider people who have worshiped with us for a time and have, perhaps in personal Bible studies, people have been studying with them for several months. And sometimes we wonder, why aren't they getting this? Why don't they respond to this? So long as they're willing to study, so long as they're open to hear, we ought to be willing to teach. And so they may be slow, but as long as they're open, they might yet be saved. Well, again, this third example in chapter 8, verse 22 and through 26. They came to Bethsaida and brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Again, Jesus, as he did before, is going to take this man, bring him apart from the rest of the folks. Verse 23, after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see men. I see them like trees walking around. Then again he laid his hands on his eyes and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. He sent him home to his house, saying, do not even enter the village. In other words, don't go tell everybody about this. Why this two-stage healing? Was there some lacking in Jesus' power the first time he touched his eyes? Why twice? Again, the purpose of this is for the disciples' understanding. What's he showing? It takes time. It'll take time for some people to see clearly who Jesus is, to see clearly the word, the hope that he gives. Give them some time. Jesus will continue to work in their lives. He touched them once. He'll touch them again. He'll continue to work until they trust in him. It takes time. There's another, I'll have to close with this. I think there's another amazing difference between the Pharisees and Jesus. You see what it is? Spit. What the Pharisees and the chief priest and all those who are intent on Jesus being crucified, what they do? They spit on him. That was the absolute worst, short of actually killing him, that's the absolute worst insult. What's Jesus do with spit? He blesses, he gives life. They spit on Jesus so he'll die. He does so to give people life. Amazing. Amazing. With the Jews, they cursed Jesus. Jesus, he blesses to heal and to give life. What's the verse say? With the mouth one blesses and one curses. But these men who reviled Jesus, in turn, some of them he will ultimately bless. It certainly is no lacking in Jesus' power that it took a time for this man to see clearly. But again, it's placed between two statements of the disciples being unable to understand. But again, he's going to continue to work in their lives to demonstrate who he is and why they should trust him till they have an opportunity to see clearly. So far, what's lacking in them? They know the facts. They just don't know the application. They just really don't yet understand that more than just giving sight to blind eyes and more than helping someone get up and walk, that Jesus is coming to change lives from a hopeless spirit, physical existence to a glorious spiritual hope. That takes a while to understand. There's the fact. Again, they know the facts. Jesus is going to heal. Fact, he feeds the hungry. Fact, he feels compassion. Fact, he ministers both night and day and goes way out of his way to do so. Fact, he will be crucified. But why? To seek and save those who are seeking him. Still true today. 3 kinds of blindness. We've all either been there or to some degree might still be. But we who are open to learn and willing to trust, he's still working in our lives. Still helping us to see until we see him clearly in the last day. And I guess we best stop.